So the big question now is whether this budget actually shifts the needle or changes much for most Australians. Joining us is our business editor, Ross Greenwood. So, Ross, it feels like slim pickings from a budget the government did not expect to deliver.
And it really felt like a budget that the government didn't want to deliver. It felt like a budget that had been put together with some haste. It almost looked like a budget where these tax cuts were delivered simply to try and divert people's attention away from the fact that the budget is going to be in deficit. In other words, a loss for the next decade, and the debts are going to rack up. In actual fact, apart from the whole COVID era, this is the highest spending government that Australia has had since the mid-1980s. And this is the gross debt that just simply goes on and on out into the future for Australians. And so from that point of view, now you've got interest on those debts now coming in at around about the number 7 spending item for the federal government. It's never been this high in a long, long time, and there is no end to it. That's the problem. The fact of the matter is that there are also heroic assumptions in this budget. Assumptions like the economic growth numbers, where the Treasurer now wants business to get out and start to spend, but big business in particular is leaving the country. It's a fundamental problem for this nation, and there is neither political party at this stage which seems willing to address it. It's a fundamental issue that Australia's economy needs to grow faster. It needs to have policies in place to make us more competitive, and yet what you've got from both sides right now is almost a game of survival to get to the next election.
So hearing Peter Dutton this morning, the election is really going to focus on Australians and our cost of living. But does a $5 a week tax cut really do anything to address that cost of living in your view?
Absolutely zero, right? So the whole point of the fact that it matters, Pete, it's your money. As I pointed out last night in our coverage here on Sky, you forget that the bracket creep has taken so much money, thousands of dollars away from people over these past couple of years, with inflation pushing them into higher tax brackets. Remember, this is the government giving you your money back, but they're only giving a sliver of it back. They're not giving all of the close on average $3,500, $3,400 that's been taken from people in terms of higher taxes. So when the government talks about the cost of living and then points at supermarkets and has inquiries and does all sorts of things, it doesn't point at itself ever that it actually is the cause of much of this cost of living crisis, of the inflation, and therefore of the interest rate increases that people have had to bear over that time.
Yeah, I put those questions to the PM and the Treasurer this morning about debt and deficit, and they were avoiding those big time. But anyway, Australia just keeps up racking this debt, Ross. So how does this affect, and Andrew McKellar actually made this point a little earlier today too, how does it affect the country's ability to cope if there is a serious downturn, if there is another huge global economic shock like another pandemic?
Yeah, OK, so not even a pandemic, for goodness sakes, Pete, even a big downturn. And remember, the Treasurer alluded to this last night, talking about storm clouds, talking about Trump and tariffs, talking about what's taking place in Ukraine, what's happening in the Middle East, and saying that these could all be things that affect us in the future. Well, if that were the case, the government would have saved a lot more money. The government would not have an open-ended spending, which just simply seems to go on in programs that have no end, that are growing many, many times the rate of inflation right now. And so as a result, this is the spending in red, that the government's own decisions since December last year. So they continue to make decisions. Almost every time the Prime Minister turns up, he gives away another $1 billion. So the issue at some stage is somebody has got to have some discipline. The spending has got to actually be capped. That seems to be one thing that Peter Dutton will announce on Thursday with his budget and reply speech. But the fact of the matter is Australia is not in a great position to withstand a downturn. And the great fear is the heroic assumption in the budget is that unemployment can stay at 4.25%. And that's where the government gets most of its taxes from. And so if that were to suddenly go wrong and unemployment rose to 5% or 5.5%, then the budget would be significantly underwater and those debts would be many, many times higher than what we're seeing right now.
All right, let's go to the latest inflation numbers that are out today, Ross. And the Reserve Bank decides on interest rates next week. So how does this story unfold?
Well, we'll see what the Reserve Bank's reaction is. Likely to keep interest rates on hold next week. But then even the budget does factor in another 2 interest rate cuts this year. Then you've got the inflation numbers that come out today for February. They're expected to be pretty flat, coming in at 2.5%. But again, give us that sense that it really is about the government and the money they've handed out in terms of energy rebates that are really keeping that inflation rate under the Reserve Bank's preferred band between 2 and 3%.
All righty, Ross, good to see you. Thank you again, and excellent coverage last night as always. Got to chat to you again soon.